A sword is not dangerous on the day it is finished. It is dangerous on the day nobody in the workshop can remember it being anything else. Before that day, it was ore. Then it was a bar of steel, dull and shapeless, folded and hammered thousands of times by someone patient enough not to rush it. Nobody watching strike number 40 would have called that blade dangerous. But strike number 40 was the reason strike number 4000 mattered. Most people never become dangerous to anything, including their own excuses. They stay soft steel their entire lives, comfortable, familiar, easy to bend back into shape the moment they try to change. You've met this person. There's a decent chance you are this person, and if that stings a little, good, because that sting is the first honest thing that's happened to you all week. This is a story about a man who spent 14 years being safe, and what it cost him, and the strange craftsman who taught him how to stop. Before we go on, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far this story travels. And if you're loving it so far, join the family by hitting subscribe, because tomorrow we've got something special lined up just for you. Ethan Cole was 34 years old and worked as an insurance claims adjuster, which meant his entire job was walking into places that had been ruined and calculating exactly how ruined they were. Fires, floods, a garage that collapsed under snow it was never built to hold. Ethan was good at his job in the specific way that quiet, careful people are good at jobs nobody else wants. He noticed things. He filled out forms correctly the first time. His manager called him reliable, which in that office was the closest thing to a compliment anyone gave. At home, Ethan had a garage of his own, and in it sat 4 unfinished woodworking projects, a table saw he'd bought used and never fully calibrated, and a drawer with 11 business plans in it, alphabetized, because even his procrastination was organized. He had read enough about starting a small furniture business to teach a course on it. He had built almost nothing. His wife, Priya, had stopped asking about the garage 2 years earlier, not out of cruelty, but because she'd learned the question made him quiet for the rest of the evening. His son was 7 and had recently stopped asking Ethan to build him a treehouse. He'd simply stopped bringing it up, the way children stop bringing up things they've quietly concluded won't happen. Ethan noticed that. He noticed everything. Noticing was his whole career. What he couldn't do was change. In March, Ethan was assigned a small claim on the edge of town, a workshop fire that had damaged most of a building, but somehow left the back corner untouched. The workshop belonged to a man named Kenji Aoyama, 68 years old, a retired swordsmith, who now mostly restored old blades for collectors. Ethan walked through the char and the water damage with his clipboard, doing his job, until he reached the back corner and stopped. On a stand, wrapped in cloth that had somehow survived the smoke, sat a half-finished blade, not sharp, not shining, just a long piece of dark, folded steel, rough at the edges, clearly unfinished. "That's not on my list," Ethan said. "It's not for sale, and it's not for insuring," Kenji said. "It's not worth anything yet." "Then why keep it?" Kenji looked at him the way you look at someone who has asked a much bigger question than they realize they've asked. "Because it will be." Ethan should have finished the assessment and left. Instead, he asked how long the blade had been sitting there. Kenji said, 11 years. Ethan, a man who had 11 unfinished business plans in a drawer, felt something he didn't have a name for yet, and asked if he could come back sometime, off the clock, just to see how it was made. Kenji said yes before Ethan finished the sentence. Ethan returned the following Saturday expecting a tour. Instead, Kenji handed him a small hand file and pointed at a rough piece of scrap steel clamped to the bench. "File this edge until it's smooth, then stop." "That's it?" "That's it. 5 minutes. Don't do more." Ethan filed for 5 minutes and produced an edge that was, by any honest measure, still rough. He said so. Kenji shrugged and told him to come back tomorrow and do it again. 5 minutes, same piece of steel. This went on for 2 weeks. 5 minutes a day, before Ethan checked his phone, before he made coffee, before the day had a chance to talk him out of it. He felt ridiculous most mornings, a grown man filing a scrap of metal that wasn't going to become anything. On day 12, something shifted. He caught himself walking toward the workbench before he'd consciously decided to. His hands wanted the file the way they usually wanted his phone. When he told Kenji this, the old man nodded, like it was the least surprising thing he'd heard all year. "You've just met Kaizen," he said. "Small, repeated improvement, done so consistently that your brain stops treating it as a decision and starts treating it as who you are. You didn't try to become a craftsman in 2 weeks. You just proved to yourself you'd show up. That's the only thing that mattered. A filed piece of scrap metal isn't going to build me a business." "No," Kenji agreed, "but showing up for something small every day, without fail, will build the person capable of running one." The steel was never the point. Ethan's next assignment was harder to accept. Kenji told him he could work in the garage for as long as he wanted each evening, on one condition. He had to stop at exactly the 20-minute mark, even mid-cut, even if the piece was going well, even if he felt like he could push through and finish. "That's backwards," Ethan said. "I finally have momentum and you want me to quit early? You've had momentum before. You built 4 unfinished projects on momentum. What you've never had is a stopping point that doesn't come from exhaustion." Kenji called this hara-hachi-bu, an old idea from Okinawa about eating until you're 80% full instead of stuffed. He said it applied to almost everything. Stop before the point of collapse, and there's something left in the tank for tomorrow. Push to the point of collapse, and tomorrow doesn't happen, because some part of you now associates the project with the feeling of being wrung out. Ethan tried it, and it felt wrong for exactly as long as filing scrap steel had felt pointless. 2 weeks later, he noticed he was still showing up on the days after long, hard shifts at the office. Days that would have previously ended with him falling asleep in front of the television. He wasn't running out of fuel anymore, because he'd stopped burning all of it every single time. By the end of the 2nd month, he had a finished stool, small, plain, a little uneven on one leg. It was the first thing he had completed in 3 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By the 4th month, Ethan had moved on to a small side table, and it went badly. A miscut piece of walnut, expensive walnut, ruined an entire weekend's work. He'd rushed the last cut because a work call had eaten into his 20 minutes, and rushing had cost him. He didn't go back to the garage for 6 days. His old pattern, the one that had killed 11 previous attempts at 11 previous things, was already whispering that he'd proven, once again, that he wasn't built for this. Priya found him on the couch on the 7th evening, phone in hand, doing nothing in particular, which was its own kind of confession. She didn't say much. She just asked if he'd talked to Kenji about the table. He texted Kenji that night. "Ruined the walnut. Might just be who I am." Kenji's reply came the next morning. "Did you file for 5 minutes this week?" Ethan hadn't, and said so, embarrassed. "Come Saturday," Kenji said. At the workshop, Kenji told him about wabi-sabi, the idea that nothing finished is ever flawless, and that the flaws are part of what makes a thing worth keeping, rather than a flaw to be hidden. A blade with a single visible fold line in the steel isn't a failed blade. It's evidence of the process that made it strong. "You ruined one piece of wood," Kenji said. "That's a mistake. Disappearing for a week was the danger, not the mistake." He explained the difference between stumbling, which everyone does, and quitting, which is a decision made in the dark that feels permanent, but almost never is. Ethan went home and, for the first time in his adult life, returned to a project the same week he'd wrecked it. Something strange happened around the 8th month, and it wasn't in the garage. It was at work. Ethan's manager asked him to take on a weekend audit, the kind of unpaid overtime Ethan had absorbed without complaint for years. Ethan said no, not rudely, just clearly, for what might have been the first time in his career. His manager looked at him like he'd grown a second head. His brother-in-law, at a family barbecue, asked how the little hobby was going, in the tone people use when they're threatened by something they've decided to call small. Ethan felt the old urge to shrink, to laugh it off, to agree it was probably nothing. Instead, he said he was building a dining set for a neighbor who'd offered to pay for it, and let the silence that followed sit there uncorrected. This is the part nobody warns you about. When you stop being soft, dependable, endlessly available steel, some people around you get uncomfortable, because your old shape was useful to them. A friend who never finishes anything makes an unfinished friend feel less alone. A coworker who always says yes to overtime makes everyone else's no look worse by comparison. Kenji had a name for this too, though he admitted it wasn't strictly a Japanese philosophical term. He just called it the cost of the edge. A dull knife bothers no one. A sharp one gets treated with more care, and sometimes more suspicion, because it can actually cut. Ethan kept both jobs that year, the claims office and the growing pile of finished furniture in his garage, but he stopped apologizing for the second one. That, more than any single project, was the moment the old Ethan quietly stopped being who he was. In the 11th month, Ethan asked Kenji, finally, about the half-burnt blade that had started all of this. Kenji told him it had belonged to his own father, a swordsmith, who died before completing it, and that Kenji had spent 11 years unable to decide whether to finish it or leave it exactly as his father had left it. For a long time, I thought finishing it would be a kind of betrayal, he said, like I was erasing him by moving forward. He'd finally understood, he said, that a blade left unfinished forever isn't a memorial. It's just an unfinished blade. His father hadn't spent a lifetime folding steel so that it would sit wrapped in cloth in a corner. He'd done it so someone would eventually pick it up and keep going. That week, Kenji finished the blade. Ethan was there for the final polish. It wasn't ceremonial. It was quiet, almost ordinary. Two men in a small workshop with a piece of steel that had taken 11 years and 40 minutes to complete, depending on how you counted. Gambaru, Kenji said, wiping the steel down, holding on through the parts that are simply hard, with no trick to make them easier. I could have taught you Kaizen and Hara Hachibu and wabi-sabi, and none of it would have mattered without this. Small steps only work if you keep taking them on the days you don't want to. By the 18th month, Ethan had built a treehouse, not a metaphorical one, an actual treehouse, in the backyard, for a son who had long since stopped asking. His son hadn't requested it. Ethan simply started building it on Saturdays, and by the third weekend the boy was out there handing him nails, not because he'd been invited, but because he could see, correctly, that this one was really going to get finished. When Ethan finally told Kenji what his ikigai was, the actual reason underneath the woodworking and the discipline and the 20-minute rule, it wasn't about furniture at all. It was that he'd spent 14 years being the person who assessed what was already broken, and he wanted, before his son grew old enough to notice the difference, to be the person who built something instead. Kenji said that was the whole point of everything they'd done. Ikigai gives you the reason. Kaizen gives you the method, one small improvement at a time. Hara Hachibu keeps you from burning out before the habit takes root. Wabi-sabi lets the mistakes stay mistakes, instead of becoming excuses to quit. And Gambaru is simply the willingness to keep your hand on the file when nothing about the day makes you want to. None of the five, alone, would have gotten Ethan through 14 years of a drawer full of unfinished plans. Together, they turned 5 minutes of filing scrap steel into a treehouse, a dining set, a small side business, and a son who once again asked his father to come outside and play. Here's what I want you to take from this, and it's the same offer Kenji made Ethan, and the same one that Christopher's doctor made him in an earlier video some of you have already watched. You don't need a plan for the next 5 years. You need one small, almost embarrassingly small action, repeated daily, for 2 weeks. 5 minutes at a workbench, 1 paragraph written, 1 walk to the mailbox. Something so small that skipping it would require you to actively lie to yourself about why. Do that for 14 days and you will have proven the only thing that was ever actually in question, which is whether you can keep a promise you make to no one but yourself. Comment the smallest thing you're going to start tomorrow morning. Not the 5-year plan, just the first cut. I'll be reading, and in 2 weeks I'll come back to this comment section to see who's still filing the steel. You were never soft steel forever. You were just unforged. That's our story. If you enjoyed it, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. And tomorrow, more stories are waiting for you. Thanks for watching.